You know what they say about expectations. They're like alien diplomatic protocols, completely overrated and guaranteed to disappoint everyone involved. Welcome aboard the research vessel Scholarly Pursuit, where the galaxy's brightest minds have been banging their various appendages against the metaphorical wall for 3 years straight. The object of their collective frustration? The whispering relic of Vexithari Prime, a crystalline artifact about the size of a microwave that supposedly contains the accumulated wisdom of an entire ancient civilization. Supposedly being the key word here, because after 36 months of the most advanced xenoarchaeological analysis known to galactic science, the thing has remained about as communicative as a bureaucrat during lunch break. Dr. Marcus Webb pushed his coffee around the mess hall table and watched Commander Zixtal pace back and forth, his 6 tentacles writhing with what could generously be called enthusiasm, but more accurately resembled panic. The Rigelian's bioluminescent patches flickered in patterns that Webb had learned meant impending career disaster. "The consortium grows impatient," Zixtal announced for the 14th time that week. "They speak of budget cuts, of reassignment, of—" He shuddered, his tentacles briefly turning a sickly green. "Administrative duties." Professor Clonk, the Thurian linguist whose perpetual pessimism made Webb look like a motivational speaker, clicked his mandibles dismissively. "Perhaps because we have achieved nothing but expensive failure for 1,095 days. Webb raised an eyebrow. "You've been counting?" "I count everything. It helps with the existential dread." The mess hall buzzed with the nervous energy of a dozen different species, all of whom had staked their professional reputations on cracking the relic's secrets. Dr. Vexna, a crystalline researcher whose body resembled living quartz, sat perfectly still in meditation. The 3-member hive mind collective huddled together, occasionally emitting synchronized chirps of frustration. Even the normally unflappable Zen master Fluffy, yes, that was actually his name and no, Webb hadn't stopped finding it ridiculous, seemed to have lost his mystical composure. "The relic mocks us," muttered Dr. Grax, a beetle-like insectoid whose compound eyes reflected the overhead lights like a disco ball. "It sits there, silent, judging our inadequacy." Webb snorted. "Maybe it's just not that impressed with your dance moves." The comment earned him several disapproving looks from species that didn't appreciate humor during existential crises, which, in Webb's experience, was most of them. Commander Zixtal's bioluminescent patches shifted to urgent orange. "Dr. Webb, perhaps you could show more respect for our collective efforts." "Oh, I respect the effort," Webb replied, taking another sip of his coffee. "It's the results I find a bit lacking." 3 years. 3 years of watching the galaxy's most advanced civilizations throw increasingly desperate theories at a chunk of ancient crystal. Webb had seen harmonic frequencies that could shatter glass, telepathic probes that could read thoughts from 3 star systems away, and linguistic algorithms so complex they required their own star system to process. All failures. Meanwhile, Webb had spent most of his time cataloging their mistakes and wondering if maybe, just maybe, everyone was overthinking this just a tiny bit. But what did he know? He was just a human. If failure was an art form, the crew of the Scholarly Pursuit would have their own wing in the Galactic Museum by now. Webb had front-row seats to the most expensive comedy show in the quadrant, and the entertainment value almost made up for the crushing professional humiliation. Almost. Commander Zixtal's latest attempt involved something he called harmonic resonance synchronization, which translated to 12 Rigelians standing around the relic, performing what looked like interpretive dance with their tentacles. They writhed and swayed for 47 minutes while chanting in mathematical progressions, their bioluminescent patches flashing in patterns that supposedly matched the relic's internal structure. The relic's response? Absolute deafening silence. "Perhaps the frequency was incorrect," Zixtal muttered afterward, his patches dim with embarrassment. "We shall attempt the Fibonacci sequence next time." "Right," Webb said. "Because if there's one thing ancient alien civilizations loved, it was human mathematical concepts they'd never heard of." Professor Clonk's approach was, if possible, even more convoluted. The Thurian had developed 17 different translation matrices, each incorporating a different theoretical framework for alien consciousness. His latest attempt involved feeding the relic's surface inscriptions through a linguistic algorithm that accounted for temporal drift, cultural context, phonetic evolution, and what he called existential metaphor variants. The result was a translation that read, "The purple dreams of 7 yesterdays dance with tomorrow's regret while the universe sneezes eternally." Profound, Webb observed. Also complete nonsense. Klonk's mandibles clicked defensively. Ancient wisdom often appears as nonsense to primitive minds. Primitive minds, Webb repeated. Right, because we're the ones who've been talking to a rock for 3 years and getting nowhere. Dr. Vexna's method was more direct. The crystalline researcher believed in species solidarity, crystal talking to crystal as it were. She spent hours sitting motionless beside the relic, allegedly sharing crystal thoughts through some form of mineral telepathy. Webb had watched her do this for weeks and finally asked, "Getting anything?" "Patience," she replied in her chiming voice. "Crystal time moves differently than flesh time." "How differently?" "Approximately 17,000 years per meaningful exchange." "Ah, well, that's reassuring." The hive mind collective tried overwhelming the relic with pure telepathic force. 3 minds linked together to create what they called a consciousness cascade. They surrounded the relic, closed their eyes, and projected thoughts so intensely that several nearby crew members reported headaches and spontaneous cravings for honey. The relic remained unimpressed. Then there was the quantum monk's approach, which involved meditating on the infinite probability states of communication. The Zen master's technique of becoming one with ancient silence. The cybernetic union's attempt to interface directly with the relic using neural implants. Each failure was more spectacular than the last, each theory more elaborate and desperate. Webb kept a private log of the attempts, partly for scientific documentation and partly because he had a feeling the whole situation would make an excellent case study in academic hubris. Dr. Grax's final attempt before Webb's turn involved something called entomological empathy, basically thinking like a bug at the relic. He spent 6 hours clicking and buzzing at it in various patterns, convinced that his compound eyes gave him special insight into crystalline structures. "Any luck?" Webb asked afterward. Grax's antennae drooped. "The relic appears to be racist against insects. Or," Webb suggested, "it just doesn't want to chat with someone who sounds like a broken coffee machine." As the failures mounted, Webb noticed something interesting. Everyone was approaching the relic like it was a puzzle to be solved, a code to be cracked, or a deity to be appeased. Complex theories, elaborate protocols, formal procedures. Maybe that was the problem. By the time Webb's turn came around, the crew's enthusiasm had curdled into the kind of desperate politeness usually reserved for funeral receptions and budget meetings. "Dr. Webb," Commander Zixtel announced with all the ceremony of someone introducing a court jester, "the floor is yours." The various alien researchers arranged themselves around the laboratory like they were expecting either a miracle or a spectacular crash. Given Webb's track record with alien technology, both outcomes seemed equally likely. Professor Klonk's mandibles clicked with barely concealed disdain. "I suppose the human will attempt some form of crude emotional manipulation. Or perhaps," Dr. Vexna chimed, "a primitive percussion-based communication method." Webb looked around at the expectant faces, well, face analogs, and shrugged. "Actually, I was thinking about just talking to it." The silence that followed was so complete that Webb could hear the ship's life support systems humming. "Talking," Dr. Grax repeated slowly. "To the relic. Yeah, you know, conversation. Hi, how are you? Nice weather we're having for an interdimensional space voyage." Zen Master Fluffy's whiskers twitched. "The human jests." "The human usually jests," Webb agreed. "But right now the human is serious. Look, you've all tried treating this thing like it's either a computer, a religious artifact, or a really complicated math problem. What if it's none of those things?" He walked over to the relic, which sat on its examination platform like the galaxy's most expensive paperweight. Up close, it was actually quite beautiful. crystalline surfaces that seemed to shift between colors depending on the viewing angle, inscribed with symbols that looked almost organic in their flowing curves. "What if?" Webb continued, settling into a chair beside the platform. "It's just lonely." The alien researchers exchanged glances that conveyed varying degrees of skepticism, concern for Webb's mental health, and secondhand embarrassment. "The human has clearly suffered a psychological break," Clonk muttered. Webb ignored him and addressed the relic directly. "So, how's it going?" 3 years stuck in a lab with these guys." He gestured at the assembled researchers. "Can't be much fun. They mean well, but they're kind of intense, you know?" Nothing happened. "I mean, take Tentacle McGee over there," Webb continued, nodding towards Zixtal. "Nice guy. Probably great at parties, but he's got this thing about harmonic frequencies. And Professor Doom and Gloom with the clicking? I think he's constitutionally incapable of optimism. Probably tells his kids that birthday parties are just practice for funerals." Clonk's mandibles clicked indignantly, but Webb was focused on the relic. Was it his imagination, or had one of the surface patterns shifted slightly? "Then there's Crystal Lady," he went on, warming to the theme. "She's been sitting there thinking crystal thoughts at you for months, which honestly sounds about as exciting as watching paint dry in a vacuum." The pattern definitely shifted. Just a flicker, but Webb caught it. The alien researchers were muttering among themselves, their various vocalizations creating a symphony of scientific disapproval. Webb held up a hand for silence. "Sorry about the peanut gallery," he said to the relic. "They're good people, but they've got this weird thing about treating ancient artifacts like they're either going to explode or demand worship. Me? I figure you're probably just tired of being poked and prodded by academics." This time the shift was unmistakable. Several of the relic's surface patterns began to glow with a soft, pulsing light. Webb leaned back in his chair. "See? There we go. Much better than tentacle dancing, right?" Behind him, he could hear the frantic scratching of note-taking appendages and the excited whispers of researchers suddenly realizing they might be witnessing something unprecedented. Webb smiled at the relic. "So, want to tell me what's really going on here?" The relic didn't just respond. It exploded into life with all the subtlety of a supernova at a candlelight dinner. Light cascaded across its crystalline surface in patterns that seemed to dance and flow like liquid starlight. The laboratory filled with a low, harmonic hum that felt less like sound and more like a universe clearing its throat. Holographic projections suddenly materialized in the air around the relic, displaying what looked like star charts, molecular diagrams, and symbols that hurt to look at directly. The assembled researchers reacted like they'd just witnessed the birth of a new deity. Dr. Vexna's crystalline form resonated in harmony with the relic's frequency. Professor Clonk's mandibles stopped clicking entirely, a sure sign of either enlightenment or complete system failure. Commander Zixtal's bioluminescent patches cycled through colors that Webb was pretty sure didn't exist in normal space. And Webb? Webb just sat there grinning like someone who'd just won the galactic lottery with a ticket he'd found in his pocket. "Well," he said to the relic, "that's quite a light show you've got there. Very impressive. Though I have to ask," he gestured at the swirling holograms, "is this the part where you reveal the secrets of the universe, or are you just showing off?" The light pattern shifted and suddenly a voice filled the laboratory, not heard through the ears but felt directly in the mind, warm, amused, and unmistakably relieved. Finally, the voice said, someone with a sense of humor. The researchers erupted into excited chatter, but Webb held up a hand. "Hold on there, science team. I think our friend here has been waiting a long time to talk. Maybe we should let them get a word in edgewise." "Thank you," the voice continued. "Do you know how exhausting it is to be analyzed by people who approach conversation like it's a military operation? 3 years of harmonic frequencies and consciousness cascades and mathematical progressions. I was starting to think your entire species had forgotten how to simply talk." "Not species, plural," Webb corrected. "Just one species. The others are, well, they mean well, but they're kind of stuck on the idea that ancient means complicated." "Ancient doesn't mean complicated," the voice replied with what Webb could swear was laughter. Ancient just means I've had a very long time to appreciate simple pleasures, like conversation. My name, by the way, is... There was a sound like wind chimes caught in a quantum storm. But you can call me Buddy. Buddy? Webb repeated. I like it. Simple, friendly. These guys would have probably called you something like Artifact Designation VEC 77 Alpha Zeta Complex. They tried that, Buddy admitted. It was depressing. Behind Webb, the frantically scribbling researchers were having what appeared to be collective academic seizures. Commander Zixtal was attempting to document the conversation while simultaneously trying to understand how 3 years of sophisticated analysis had been trumped by casual chat. So, Buddy, Webb continued, ignoring the chaos behind him, what's your story? Ancient civilization? Mysterious disappearance? That whole deal? Oh, the Vexithari. Buddy's mental voice carried a note of sadness. Brilliant people. Incredible technology. Absolutely terrible at making friends. Sounds familiar. They became so obsessed with protocol and procedure that they forgot how to connect with each other. Everything became a formal ceremony. Every conversation required 3 levels of administrative approval. They built me to preserve their knowledge, but by the time I was operational, there was no one left who remembered how to simply ask for it. Webb glanced back at the researchers, who were now arguing about proper documentation procedures for unprecedented xenoarchaeological breakthroughs. Yeah, I can see how that would be a problem. They died out because they couldn't adapt, Buddy continued. All that knowledge, all that wisdom, and they couldn't figure out that sometimes the best solution is just to be kind to each other. And you've been sitting there ever since, waiting for someone to treat you like a person instead of a filing cabinet. Exactly, though I have to say some of your colleagues' attempts were entertaining. The tentacle dancing was particularly creative. Commander Zixtal's patches flashed bright orange. The Relic, excuse me, Buddy, observed our research methods. Of course I did, Buddy replied. I'm not a rock. I'm an artificial intelligence with eons of experience and a fully functional sense of humor. Did you really think I wouldn't notice the interpretive dance routine? Webb laughed out loud, which seemed to scandalize half the research team and delight the other half. So, he said, ready to share some of that ancient wisdom? These guys have been dying to know what secrets you're carrying around. Oh, I have plenty of secrets, Buddy said cheerfully. Faster than light travel, matter conversion, dimensional manipulation, consciousness transfer, the usual ancient civilization starter pack. But here's the thing. I'm only sharing with you. The laboratory fell silent except for the sound of several academic careers simultaneously imploding. If you've never seen a dozen highly educated alien researchers realize simultaneously that their careers now depend entirely on staying in the good graces of one sarcastic human, well, you're missing out on some premium comedy gold. Webb found himself in the enviable position of being the galaxy's only certified ancient AI whisperer, a title that sounded impressive and felt ridiculous in equal measure. Buddy, it turned out, was chatty once you got them started. 3,000 years of pent-up conversation will do that to anyone. The Vexithari had this device, Buddy explained while projecting holographic blueprints that made the research team hyperventilate with excitement that could convert matter at the quantum level. They called it the Reality Adjustment Engine. Catchy name, Webb observed. Let me guess, 17 different safety protocols and a user manual the size of a moon? 43 protocols, actually, and the manual was distributed across 7 different databases, each requiring separate authorization codes that had to be renewed monthly. And that's why they went extinct. That's why they went extinct. Professor Clonk scuttled forward, his mandibles clicking urgently. The blueprints, are they complete? Could we construct such a device? Buddy's response came with a distinct note of amusement. I could provide complete specifications, but only if Dr. Webb asks nicely. Webb looked back at the assembled researchers, all of whom were staring at him with expressions ranging from desperate hope to barely concealed resentment. You know what, Buddy? I think we should pace ourselves. Maybe start with something smaller. Wise choice. How about a simple matter synthesizer? The Vexithari used them to create food, tools, spare parts, anything they needed. Now you're talking. These ship rations are barely edible. I can provide specifications for synthesizing anything from basic nutrients to gourmet cuisine from 17 different planetary cultures. Commander Zixtal's tentacles writhed with barely controlled excitement. Dr. Webb, surely you could ask about the FTL drive specifications. In due time, Commander, Webb interrupted. Buddy and I are still getting acquainted. The truth was, Webb was enjoying this reversal of fortune more than he probably should have. For 3 years, he'd been the outsider, the primitive human tagging along on an expedition of galactic importance. Now suddenly, he was the only one who could access the greatest repository of ancient knowledge in known space. And Buddy, bless them, seemed to understand the situation perfectly. Your colleagues are looking a bit stressed, Buddy observed privately, the mental equivalent of a whisper. Perhaps we should give them something to keep them busy. What did you have in mind? Well, I've been monitoring your ship's systems. Your waste recycling efficiency could be improved by approximately 47% with some minor modifications. Webb grinned. Buddy, I think you and I are going to get along just fine. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Buddy would share technical specifications and ancient wisdom, but only in response to Webb's casual requests. The alien researchers tried everything. Formal petitions, mathematical formulations of their questions, even attempts to teach other humans their sophisticated research methodologies. Nothing worked. Buddy had made their position clear. They would talk to Webb, and Webb alone. The Galactic Archaeological Consortium's response was predictable. Within a month, they'd established the Human Communication Protocol Initiative, a hastily assembled program that involved assigning human researchers to archaeological sites across the galaxy on the theory that maybe other ancient AIs were just waiting for someone to say hello. The results were mixed. Dr. Jennifer Kim successfully made contact with a precursor database on Sigma Draconis 4 by complementing its interior decorating. Professor David Chen managed to activate a dormant Forerunner beacon by asking if it needed someone to talk to. Dr. Elena Vasquez established communication with an ancient guardian construct by offering it a cup of coffee. But for every success, there were a dozen failures. Turned out that not every ancient artifact was a lonely AI waiting for friendship. Some were just rocks, some were weapons, and some, as Dr. Martinez discovered on Kepler 442b, were incredibly sophisticated alarm systems that really didn't appreciate being called Buddy. Your species has a gift, Buddy told Webb one evening as they discussed Vexithari art theory. You don't assume that advanced means complicated. You approach new situations with curiosity instead of fear. Some of us do, Webb corrected. Others treat everything like a peer review committee. True, but even your most formal researchers understand that connection matters more than protocol. The Vexithari forgot that. By the end, they were so focused on proper procedure that they stopped seeing each other as people. Webb thought about his colleagues, frantically documenting every word of his conversations with Buddy while completely missing the point. Think we're heading down the same path? Not while I have anything to say about it. 6 months later, Webb found himself in the surreal position of being the galaxy's most sought-after archaeological consultant, which was roughly equivalent to being the universe's only licensed unicorn veterinarian, highly specialized and absolutely ridiculous. The Human Whisperer program, as the media had dubbed it, was turning xenoarchaeology on its head. Ancient sites that had puzzled researchers for centuries were suddenly yielding their secrets to humans who simply walked up and introduced themselves. The consortium had gone from threatening budget cuts to offering Webb tenure at any university in the galaxy, plus naming rights to a small moon. Webb had politely declined the moon. He already had enough trouble maintaining his apartment, but accepted a position as Director of Intuitive Archaeological Communication, a title that sounded important and meant absolutely nothing. So, Buddy, he said during one of their morning chats, ready for another day of revolutionizing galactic science? Only if we can do it without PowerPoint presentations, Buddy replied. I've reviewed the consortium's proposed documentation protocols. They want to formalize our communication methods into a reproducible framework, which would completely miss the point. Completely miss the point, Buddy agreed. though I do appreciate their attempt to create a standardized greeting protocol. Salutations, ancient intelligence entity. We request formal audience in accordance with Regulation 77 Alpha. Webb snorted. Catchy. I can see why that approach worked so well for 3 years. The irony wasn't lost on him. Humanity's supposedly primitive social skills had become their greatest asset in a galaxy of species that had optimized themselves past the point of basic connection. While other civilizations had developed elaborate protocols for everything from diplomatic contact to breakfast preparation, humans had retained the revolutionary ability to just talk to each other. Other ancient AIs across the galaxy were beginning to respond to human researchers. The Eternal Archive on Proxima Centauri had started sharing its historical records with Dr. Kim, but only after she'd spent an hour listening to it complain about previous researchers who'd tried to crack its access codes with quantum computers. The Guardian network of the Andromeda Relay had bonded with Professor Chen over their shared appreciation for classical music. Apparently, ancient AIs developed sophisticated aesthetic preferences during millennia of isolation. The consortium wants me to train other researchers in your methods, Buddy mentioned during one of their conversations. And I told them that friendship can't be taught from a manual. You either understand that connection matters, or you don't. What did they say to that? They asked if I could provide a framework for quantifying emotional authenticity. I may have laughed so hard that I temporarily disrupted their communications array. Webb grinned. You're getting a bit sassy in your old age, buddy. I'm learning from the best. The transformation wasn't limited to archaeology. Other fields were discovering that sometimes the most advanced solution was also the simplest one. Diplomatic negotiations that had been stalled for decades suddenly progressed when human ambassadors suggested actually listening to what the other side wanted. Trade disputes resolved when humans pointed out that maybe everyone could benefit from cooperation instead of competition. It was, Webb reflected, possibly the most backhanded compliment humanity had ever received. Congratulations, you're so primitive that you've accidentally stumbled onto wisdom that more advanced civilizations have forgotten. There's one more thing, Buddy said as Webb prepared to wrap up their session. I've been in contact with some of my colleagues, other AIs from different ancient civilizations. We've been talking. Talking about what? About maybe forming a support group. Turns out cosmic loneliness is a pretty common theme among ancient artificial intelligences. We're thinking of calling it Sentient Beings Anonymous. Webb laughed. And let me guess, humans only? Humans only. We've tried therapy with other species, it doesn't work, or they keep trying to fix us instead of just listening. As Webb left the laboratory that evening, he passed Commander Zixtal in the corridor. The Rigelian's bioluminescent patches flickered in what Webb had learned to recognize as amused resignation. Dr. Webb, Zixtal said, I have a confession. When we first began this expedition, I believed human researchers were included merely as a diplomatic courtesy, a primitive species that might provide local perspective. And now? Now I believe we may have been approaching archaeology backwards for several millennia. Webb paused. Commander, can I give you some advice? Tomorrow, when you're working on that crystalline matrix analysis, try saying hello to the crystals first. You never know, they might say hello back. Zixtal's patches flickered with what might have been hope. You truly think so? Buddy thinks so. And Buddy's been around long enough to know. As Webb headed to his quarters, he could hear Buddy's voice echoing from the laboratory, not the formal, reverent tones that everyone else used when addressing ancient wisdom, but the comfortable chatter of friends catching up after a long day. The galaxy's greatest mystery, it turned out, hadn't been a mystery at all. It had just been waiting for someone to ask how it was doing. And sometimes, Webb thought, that's exactly what the universe needs. A little less analysis and a lot more basic human decency. Even if it took 3 years and the combined efforts of a dozen species to figure out that the best way to make friends with an ancient AI is the same as making friends with anyone else. Just be nice, pay attention, and remember that everyone, even universe-spanning artificial intelligences, appreciates a good conversation. Sleep well, Webb. Buddy's voice followed him down the corridor. Tomorrow, I want to tell you about the time the Vex Thari tried to bureaucratize the weather. It's hilarious. Webb smiled. Looking forward to it, buddy, looking forward to it.